silence their phones. Great. And yes, and for the virtual crowd, thank you for joining us wherever you are. And I'll be reading from two chapters in the book, and then we'll have a Q&A session. For the virtual viewers, if you have questions, just please put it in the chat, and we'll take it that way. And for the in-studio audience, the in-library audience, please just raise a hand, and we'll take it that way. So we're starting in a moment or two. Give people, sometimes the MTA can make getting around even more challenging than the weekend, so we'll give it a minute or two. So thanks everyone for being here. We'll start in a moment. Yes, so for folks in the room, we have a little sign-up sheet going around. We're going to keep up with more events here. Great, thank you. Bless you. Okay. You have a minute too. Okay, is everyone signed in? So, okay, let us begin. Welcome everyone. Welcome. It's an honor to be here at the New York Public Library, the Hudson Park branch. Thank you, Emil, for having us here. And for those in the New York area, if you're visiting New York, please come to this. Is a great branch. They have a great gallery room. They have many different readings. They have all these great hybrid readings coming up, and so glad everyone could be here, both in the room and also online. And again, my name is Alvin Eng. I'll be reading from my memoir, Our Laundry, Our Town, my Chinese American life from Flushing to the downtown stage and beyond. And it's called Our Laundry, Our Town because the first part is my parents had a Chinese hand laundry in Flushing, Queens. So we're reading from that. And then we're reading a chapter from the Our Town section. The Our Town section talks about getting involved in the Manhattan theater world, or as those of us born and raised in the outer boroughs will always call Manhattan the city. So it's all about getting involved in the city. So we'll be talking about that. And we'll take questions afterwards. But again, for the virtual viewers, please put your questions in the chat. And then for folks here, please just raise your hand. So we'll do that. Okay, so again, I know it's a very busy time, very challenging time. So I appreciate everyone taking some time out from this Saturday to be here. Okay, I'll read an excerpt from chapter 1, which is called The Urban Oracle Bones of Our Laundry, channeling China's last emperor and rock and roll's first opera. While I've been blessed to have always had a roof over my head and the honor of living with loved ones, when I was growing up, homelessness was a constant spiritual state. A child's longing to belong is one of the most powerful forces and relentless muses on earth. In every culture, belonging has many different nuances of meaning and resonance. What and who exactly constitutes that destination of longing changes with every age, and in childhood with every grade. What never seems to change is the feeling that we never quite arrive, and when or if we do, it was never quite what we expected. These memoir portraits are an attempt to decode and process the urban oracle bones from growing up as the youngest of 5 children in an immigrant Chinese family that ran a hand laundry. Our family was born of an arranged marriage, and our laundry was in Flushing, Queens, in that singular universe that was New York City in the 1970s. Like many children of immigrant or other origins, I was constantly seeking out American frames of reference with which to contextualize my own outsider experiences and sensibilities. I was born on May 24th, 1962, in the long since shuttered Parsons Hospital. For any Flushing folks who are here or watching, that was used to be in the corner of Parsons Boulevard and 35th Avenue. It's since been bulldozed, and I'm sure there's been 3 sets of condos on there now. And May 24th, it's also the birthday of Bob Dylan, Patti LaBelle, and Tommy Chong of the 70s stoner comedy team Cheech and Chong, as well as Queen Victoria. So it's a good day, I feel. And let me show you a second. That was the book cover, and let me see. Okay, yes, when we were growing up, although Flushing became New York's second Chinatown in the 80s, aka the People's Republic of Flushing, in the 60s and 70s, we were only one of a fistful of Chinese families there. And the Flushing of my youth was still basking in the afterglow of the post-World War II suburban baby boom. And the zenith of that boom was the 1964-65 World's Fair. And that's my family here, there. I'm the youngest of five, so I'm there in the red striped shirt. And there we all are in front of the famous Unisphere in Queens. And back then, that generation, they would have given up everything. Many had forsaken their customs, their language. Many would have changed their appearance if they could, just to get a whiff of the American dream. That's me and my mother in 1968. It's also on the cover of the book, and the photos by my brother, Gene Eng. I think Gene might be here today online. Our Fujie Chin Chinese hand laundry was a long, narrow, railroad-style store that stretched from a parking lot in the rear to Flushing's bustling Union Street in the front. Going from the back door to the front door, the way we entered every day was the family's dining area. It was also a small kitchen and dining, but also a napping area. In many ways, you could say this was the living area. This is where we all ate and where the kids did their homework and goofed off between laundry chores. The middle room was where the ironing and wrapping of laundered garments took place. The middle room had long rectangular pads for ironing and sorting laundry, but also large white metal tables for sewing. This was the largest room and also primarily the court of our mother, Toilan Chin Eng, or the Empress Mother, as she is anointed in this book and in The Last Emperor of Flushing. In the middle room, the Empress Mother took her breaks, read her Chinese newspapers, and listened to her beloved Cantonese opera records. The front room, let me show you the front room now. This is me with my father in the front room. And I was always ready to eat. I probably just finished my third snack of the morning already by then. I was ready for more. And the front room was where our family, what I, in my Last Emperor of Flushing persona, call the Eng Dynasty. This is where the Eng Dynasty intersected with the outside world. After entering through the front door, customers stood behind a wall-to-wall wooden counter. The wooden counter is behind me and my dad there. We're on the family side. There was a wooden counter. This is where they dropped off their dirty laundry and later picked up and paid for their cleaned wrap laundry a few days later. Directly opposite our laundry's front door, the counter had a drawbridge of sorts, a cutaway countertop and gated swing door to receive deliveries as well as children coming home from school. This was the smallest room and also the domain of my dad, King Hua Eng. Between greeting customers and tending to all matters of laundry business, this is where he listened to WCBS News Radio 880 on a small transistor radio, and where he read the daily news. And on most busy Saturdays, the entire family could be found in this room. Because Dad spoke English and the Empress Mother did not, Dad's station in our laundry and in our family was the front line. Dad was usually the first face that customers would see as they entered the laundry. Always dressed in his white button-down shirt with a pen holder on the left front shirt pocket, he sat behind that front counter like a target. He went eyeball to eyeball with each and every customer, hustler, and angry war veteran who walked through the door. People would routinely open that door and take potshots like, "Can you speak Englishy, Charlie? No ticky, no shirty." Dad would just take one for the family and grow sullen and speechless. The Empress Mother, however, would respond to these taunts with a lusty, "Aya, mo yung lopan, bakui, kesi, and then." This, as translated from the delicate Toisan dialect of Cantonese, which is surely one of the overlooked Romance languages of the 20th century. And my rough translation, and apologies to actual fluent Toisan speakers, both here in the room and online, that in my estimation translation was useless white devil ghosts. You can step on shit and it will not bend. So that was the way the Empress Mother handled these people. Because the Empress Mother's station in our laundry abutted the wall that divided the public space from the private family space with my dad as a big buffer in between. Mom, the Empress Mother, got to keep her fiery Toisan core together. And from the late 19th to the late 20th century, 80% of Chinese immigrants to America emigrated from Toisan. During this time, Toisan was the dominant dialect and aesthetic of the Chinatowns and working class Chinatowns throughout North America. In this light, and back in that era, many ways the Toisanese were very much like the Sicilians. Yes, they were. Both groups were Southern outcasts, mostly farmers, who were looked down upon as being too loud and belligerent, uncouth, uncultured by their supposedly more sophisticated governing northern brethren. Guangdong and Sicily are also geographically separated from their respective mainlands. Guangdong is isolated by a foreboding mountain range, and until the early 20th century was accessible only by sea. This separation and isolation instilled a staunch independent spirit in its people. In North America, Toisan towns, like Sicilian enclaves, operated under their own rules, regulations, and justice systems. When words, deeds, and laws failed, there was always the meat cleaver. While I never saw my parents pull actual meat cleavers on each other, I witnessed their weekly, sometimes daily tremors of psychological warfare on each other, grow more viciously antagonistic week after week. To escape this oft-times suffocating and intimidating environment of our laundry, thankfully my brother Herman and I bonded and created a joyous world of our own through the power of rock and roll. And here's a picture. This is me and my brother from much later on. Anyways, my brother was the accomplished musician. He's now a guitar technician and a musician out in LA. He's gone on the road with like Paul Simon, another Queens guy, Paul Simon, Bob Dylan, my birth for sake. But this was years later. But how we got started was a different way. We'll come back to some slides in a moment. And in some ways too, rock and roll saved our lives. And I bought my first record when I was 6 years old. Again, for old-time Flushing folks, online or in person, I bought my first record at the Masters department store on the corner of 37th Avenue and Main Street. And back then, I somehow broke away from my older siblings and sprinted over to the music and records department. Barely able to reach the counter, I somehow plopped my birthday dollar bill on the counter and said, "Hey Jude" and "Revolution" by the Beatles. The surprised clerk looked up to my older siblings, who had by now caught up to me, just to confirm the purchase. They said, "Yeah, it's legit." And just as I don't exactly remember how I even had a $1 bill in my pocket, I don't remember how I knew to ask for both Beatles songs, as if I knew it was going to be a double A-sided single. I just did. And with the Beatles, you got to be up on your P's and Q's. There's Beatle fanatics everywhere. So I just make sure I got that right. So just make sure with that. But that LP got me going, but it was the next one that truly changed Herman and my lives forever. Our conversation went kind of like this in that day. "Everybody on the block is talking about Tommy," raved Herman. "The Who are even going to play the whole thing at Woodstock. We have to buy it, Al." "But $6 one album," I asked. By now, 1 year later, I was now a sophisticated music consumer. "It's a double album, just like the White Album." Herman carefully presented his claim, "and it's only on sale at Corvette's." "Corvette's is so far away and it's pouring out," I objected. "Hey, it's 8+ at Record Spec or King Carroll on Main Street." Back then, the 1960s and 70s record stores in Flushing. "I don't know, Herm. Al, we got to do it. The rain's letting up. It'll be worth every cent, I promise." Herman made his closing argument. Okay. I reluctantly handed over my hard-earned laundry salary allowance to Herman, putting our combined kitty over the magic mark of $7, because after all, there was tax to pay on vinyl records too. And off we rode on our Schwinn banana seat bikes through 3 neighborhoods and over 10 miles round trip to a lighter but still steady rain to EJ Corvette's in Douglaston. That was the only store in Northeast Queens where we can afford to buy Tommy. And when we got home, after deep listening to the Who's and rock and roll's first opera, particularly to the transcendent "Listening to You" finale, a majestic moment where guru and disciple, Svengali and puppet, audience and artist are all united in one 12-bar nirvana, Tommy's context became our context for everything. Herman was right. It was worth every penny. After that, Herman and I started quoting lyrics to each other so much where the lyrics from Tommy became virtually our entire vocabulary. We would wander around Flushing and in Manhattan's Chinatown on Sundays with our parents and imagine connections between our two most familiar stomping grounds and the Who's native London neighborhood of Shepherd's Bush. After witnessing some heinous screaming match between Dad and Empress Mother, either in our laundry or down in Chinatown, Herman and I would instinctively look at each other and say, "How do you think he does it? I don't know." And by mimicking Pinball Wizard, we had found two things. We'd found a new favorite pastime, but maybe more importantly, we found a way to deflect many of life's unpleasantries with the mighty shield of rock and roll. The Empress Mother encouraged my drawing pictures and listening to Tommy, and let me do this beside her in her break room. And I would play Tommy over and over while alternately drawing pictures and looking at the album cover's artwork. And back then it was a double album with a 3-cover thing. And they went against most pop records at that time, most pop records of this time, where rather than just featuring pictures of the album cover, they really just put pictures of what they felt Tommy would see and feel. And had a completely different experience. And I say for my 7-year-old self, that was probably my first art gallery, looking at the pictures and listening to the music. And it really put me in a different spell every time. But this was still the Fujian Chinese hand laundry. And inevitably, my reverie would be broken by a bigger power. The Empress Mother's drowning out Tommy with her playing what my 9-year-old self called that dreaded pots and pans music. But the rest of the culture world called this pots and pans music Cantonese opera. And yes, in the early 70s, I think the Eng dynasty was probably the only American household in which the kids were pleading with their parents to please turn that noise down. But in that sacred back room, when they weren't blasting with shrill morality tales of supernatural Cantonese opera carriages, the Empress Mother would frequently lecture me on the ways of the world beyond our little laundry fiefdom. And again, I apologize to all Hudson speakers. Mo hong and ong nai dai, tek yin. On hong and oki. Mo hong and ong nai dai. There's no good people out there. They don't feel for people. All the good people you'll ever need are right here in our laundry. There's no good people out there. So for the next 30 years, through the sweeping worldwide changes of the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, within the walls of the Fujian Chinese hand laundry, the song remained the same for the dominating Empress Mother and her obliging last emperor of youngest son. We could have lived in the 1870s, or the 1780s, or the 1690s. We move to another chapter from the second part of this. And and I'm breaking the library rules now. Sorry. Don't do this in your library, but do support your public library. Public library is such a great lifeblood of every community, every learning experience. So it's a great thing. I'll take that off camera so it doesn't look so bad. Okay. The second part is called Our Town. It talks about getting involved in the music world. And we'll honor today that the chapter 10, it's called Trip the Light, Gorgeous Mosaic, Double Happiness, Discovering Playwright and Activism, starts with a rap song that was co-written by my friend Tim Kramer, who was here today. So we're so honored that he's here. Yes. And a funny story too, in doing readings for this book, you'll hear this song was, depending on your perspective, either an homage or a blatant, shameless ripoff of Public Enemy's Fight the Power. And I did a reading at the book club bar in the East Village, and to my delight and to my shock, a member of Public Enemy was in the audience. I was going, oh boy, okay. I guess we'll have to face the music at some point, right? Literally. But thankfully, the way the club was set up, he seemed to be sitting over here, so I didn't have to see him while I was doing this. So, okay, so I knew he was in the room, but thankfully afterwards, he liked it a lot and even took a picture afterwards. So, and there's been no lawsuits or cease and desist orders in the mail since, but I haven't checked today's mail yet. So you know, we don't want to count our blessings, but that's over a month now, so that was a good thing. Okay, so this is a rap song called "Rock Me, Going Hell." Do the first 2 verses, and then we'll read about this too. So you can imagine. Let me go back to my screen share. This is just to give you an idea. We're going back to we're still in the 20th century, but it's a different way this time. This was how the character looked. Yes, this was yes, just to show you, yeah. In some ways, you have to be shameless to write a memoir, right? So this was me as my character, the Gung Hae Kid, back in the late '80s, early '90s, and the song was something like this. It was like imagine the riff. Ding 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 gong. Lose that shit. This ain't the mainland. I'm the Gung Hae Kid. Hope you understand. Don't do no kowtowing on the rickshaw. So don't be talking no dragons or the Great Wall. I ain't good in math. I don't know kung fu. There's no fucking future. So Fu Manchu. So don't mess with me or call me Bruce Lee. Cause ain't no one better than Kid Gung Hae. Rock me Gung Hae. Rock me Gung Hae. Rock me Gung Hae. Rock me Gung Hae. We'll skip right to the next verse now. Yellow peoples a lot in this country. Now we're the so-called model minority. Truly don't mean shit if you think about it. So still despise our slanty eyes. So don't overcompensate for your sorry state. You can't keep us in the laundry or the railroad track because it takes a nation of billions to hold us people back. One more time. Rock me Gung Hae. Rock me Gung Hae. Rock me Gung Hae. Gung Hae Fa Choi. Ding 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 gong. Rock Me Gung Hae is the title song for my punk rap musical, The Gung Hae Kid. Again, as an homage to Public Enemy's Fight the Power, but also to Do the Right Thing, the 1989 Spike Lee joint in which that song ignites the opening credits. Remember, if anyone's seen it, you never forget that. There was the one and only Rosie Perez doing this amazing raw, like wild style dancing. And just when I heard when I heard this hip hop, when I heard that these black hip hop artists saying, you know, Elvis was the hero the most, but never meant. I cursed enough today. Sorry, Emil. It never meant to me. It's like, whoa, that hit me like a jolt. But it was amazing. So this is my little homage. And this is so the Gung Hae Kid started with that song, but it ended with us. People's lives are like dreams. And that was also the play's prologue and epilogue. And that was a traditional Cantonese lullaby that the Empress Mother would sing around the laundry and in our house. And in many ways, these two lyrics, they represented the contours of my disposition during the late 80s, early 90s multiculturalism movement. In New York City, that movement was called the Gorgeous Mosaic by our city's first Black mayor, the late Honorable David N. Dinkins. The Gorgeous Mosaic era redefined the American frame to which I had been longing to belong my entire life. The number 8 holds special significance for the Chinese. It's a homonym of good fortune and a symbol of good luck. Thus, 1988 pretended to be a good year to start new things as well as to renew older ones. It was also the year of the dragon. Traditionally, the dragon symbolizes power, nobleness, honor, luck, and success. Alongside making the transition from the music biz to director of public relations for Asian Cinevision, I think we have some old-time Chinatown advocates, Asian American advocates, remember Asian Cinevision, ACV. At ACV, I first started to get involved with both the Asian American arts and the Asian American activism world of New York City. I was also looking to rekindle dormant creative pursuits, the last of which were here. The last of which was I was in punk bands in the 70s and 80s. This is my band called The Grips, and I hadn't done anything since then until the late 80s. So this time, I was trying to rekindle my dormant creative pursuits, the last of which were performing and writing songs with this punk band. And one of my first tasks was to help the writer performance artist Jessica Hagedorn and critic curator Daryl Chin with their acclaimed literary series, Talk and Cheap. The series' first guest in 1988 was playwright David Henry Wong. He was to read from M. Butterfly, the play that makes his Broadway debut the following month. So let's see. Let me stop this second. We'll try to get into the present a little bit. Okay, so David Henry Wong's powerful play proved that there was a place for our voices and visions on the biggest theatrical stage in the world. As M. Butterfly would go on to have a celebrated extended run on Broadway, he won the 1988 Tony Award for Best Play for that. And here we are, 34 years later. No Asian American playwright has won the Tony Award since then. I think only 3 have been nominated. That has to change. That has to change. The morning after that provocative first public reading of Permanent Butterfly by David Henry Wong himself, I decided to apply for a playwriting workshop instead of a screenwriting workshop I had been strongly considering at the Writer's Voice. That was the creative writing program of the YMCA in the Upper West Side. While I've longed to see myself and my community's concerns on the small screen of television, as well as on the large screen, silver screen of cinema, growing up in Flushing, Queens, in an immigrant Chinese household, which only one parent spoke fluent English, this meant that Broadway and theater could not have been more remote. Yet less than a year after a worldview-changing trip that the Empress Mother and I made to China, I took the first steps in a most roundabout way to devoting my professional life to theater and playwriting. And the more I thought about playwriting, the more I found this form to mirror what I loved about rock and roll and what I revered in rock and roll songwriters. Both the playwriting and songwriting processes alternate between the solitude of artistic inquiry as a writer that leads up to the collaborative process of creating live performance spectacle. Plays are also like songs in that they can be reinterpreted in many different modes and different ways. A few days after seeing one of the first M. Butterfly previews on Broadway, I was accepted into the playwriting workshop at the Writer's Voice. And a few weeks later, still partly floating on air by the zeitgeist confirmation of M. Butterfly's fast becoming a barrier-breaking, history-making Broadway hit, I floated up the steps to my first playwriting class at the Writer's Voice. It was a magical time for a Chinese American to begin their journey as a playwright. And further witness to how Asian American arts and activism were getting wider appreciation in 1990s New York City was when The Gung Hae Kid became the first play written by an Asian American to be presented at the historic Nuyorican Poets Cafe. Again, Tim was there for that too, yes. This is also my first full-fledged production, not just a one or even three-night stand. The Nuyorican Poets Cafe is the storied center of spoken word and activism founded in the 1970s by a group of New York City Puerto Rican activists led by Miguel Algarin and Miguel Pinheiro. In the early 70s, Pinheiro became the first Puerto Rican playwright to be produced on Broadway with Short Eyes. This is almost a decade before Lin-Manuel Miranda was even born. It was an enormous affirmation for me and many of my fellow Asian American spoken word, theater, and music artists that Miguel Algarin, as well as the cafe's theater and poetry slam directors, Rome Neal and Bob Holman, welcomed us to that singular community that was the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. And although I think the poetry slam started in Chicago, in many ways the Nuyorican Poets Cafe put the slam on the international map in the 90s. It got so popular, they had two slams. They had the big main one was the open slam on Friday nights. And then I became the host of the second slam, the slam open on Wednesday nights. And the Friday night slam open was hosted by Bob Holman, a renowned poet and performance artist. And then I would sometimes guest host for him. So in many ways, I would say like in late 20th century, late night television parlance, I was almost like Joe Garagiola to Bob's Johnny Carson. You know, I would be like his guest host back then. And just standing on the stage for a slam night or any night, you could feel the power and energy in that room. I found myself in the center of a community of artistry with a singular level of primal talent and diversity that I had not witnessed before or since. The cafe felt like the heart and soul of New York City's gorgeous mosaic. Let me show you one other slide here. Yes, for the production, and this poster was designed, the design of this poster is right here too. This is designed by Saki Lee. For the Nuyorican Poets Cafe production of The Gung Hae Kid, I also had the added bonus of being the rhythm guitarist in the production's punk rock pit band, and Tim played the drums. Yes. Every night before the performance, director Rome Neal would gather the entire band, cast, and crew into a circle. In that circle, we would share what we were troubled by or what we were thankful for that night. On opening night, I became very emotional during our circle check-in. I started crying as I lamented the fact that my dad would not physically be in the house for this or any of my openings. The tears continued to flow as I shared how grateful I was for everyone in the circle and in the room then and now. I was also very grateful for all the spirits and humans who were downstairs in the cafe, especially the Empress Mother and my brother Herman. During the pre-show curtain speech, Rome Neal and Miguel Algarin graciously introduced the Empress Mother, and she took a flashy bow for the ages. I had to get the showbiz gene from somewhere. Every night, the prologue and epilogue ended with a recording of the Empress Mother singing People's Lives Like Dreams. On opening night, the voice of the play's prologue and epilogue, as well as the embodiment of its conscience and soul, were seated at one of the cafe's front tables. Throughout the show, I kept watching the Empress Mother and Herman. I smiled as Herman would visually react to the show's laughs, cries, and everything in between. But I was even more moved by the Empress Mother's static facial expression. While she was clearly proud to be there, and I couldn't have been prouder to have her there, it was heartbreaking. It was a heartbreaking visual and visceral revelation of the language barrier between us all these years. As mother and youngest son, we shared so much. Yet as a writer, I could never fully share with her what was now most important and vital to me. I regretted even more that I could not fluently speak, let alone write, any dialect of Chinese. In the end, the gorgeous mosaic was the most healing, empowering, and exhilarating period. It made most of us accept and process a more nuanced and complex portrait of who we were as a city, a society, and as a world. Yet inevitably, every answer of affirmation that the gorgeous mosaic offered posed even more complicated questions. The underside of the gorgeous mosaic era was the fight and resiliency required to celebrate and represent our unique identities, communities, and cultures. Scenes and worlds often change in a whim. Other times it takes an epidemic and everything in between. Each and every performance and work of art is a statement and celebration of being. All representation is personal and political. We must seize the moment and realize it while we can. Thank you very much. So thanks everyone for listening. I just want to open up some questions now too. And again, I know with everything going on, I greatly appreciate everyone being here. So, yes, and again, thank you for the Hudson Park Library for having us. And so glad so many new and we won't use the word old, so many new and longtime friends could be here today. So this is a wonderful thing. So please, any questions here? Yes, hi, Don, and then the back. Yes. Okay, great. We'll start with one in the room, then we'll go to one on Zoom. Thank you, Donna. Yes.
Would you elaborate a little on the Empress Mother? Interesting.
Oh yes, no, they had it. We get into their most people have an arranged marriage. It was very different back then too. Like my family's from a poor farming village in Toisan that's outside of Guangzhou, outside of Guangdong in Guangzhou province, and so their arranged marriage. She had a very tough life. Where remember my parents' generation, they lived through a revolution, a Japanese occupation by the time they were teenagers. So they went through so much, and so she, in addition to, and then after the war, my grandfather on her side, obviously, and somehow they didn't have enough medical supplies. So after the Japanese occupation, so he died. And at that point, their mother abandoned them. So she was raised by village elders, and I'm very grateful to them. I get to meet them later on. So she had a very tough life, and yet, again, because she had that buffer, I think, because my father spoke English and he dealt with that. He was on the front line. I felt that, so my mother got, in some ways, while she was totally disenfranchised here in America in many ways, although they did very well, she got to keep her core together. And I think that served her in many ways stronger in the end, where my dad, like in some ways, he was taking all the hits in some ways too on the front line. And he passed away much younger. So. And yet, I know people ask me now, and I do look back. I speak very little Toisan Cantonese. My mother spoke very little English, but yet we communicated all those years. So how that happened, yeah. So it was incredible. So that's it. So, but she was quite okay. She was quite an amazing person. I'm so glad for people in the room who met her and knew her. Yes, and yes, and on online we have one question where it's a very moving historic memoir. Would it be translated in Chinese or other languages? I would love for it to be translated in many languages. So yes, so absolutely, so we will do that. And I think that's Maria, who studies in my wife Wendy's class too. So yes, so again, for people joining us virtual online, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. And we have more questions here too. Yes.
I'm curious if you feel like your Chinese heritage has influenced the form of your writing as opposed to just content. If you feel like there are ways in which your background has like changed the way you write.
Yes, absolutely. In many ways too. My mother would always couch a lot of her like lessons and teachings and rhymes, if you will, like little toys on rhymes. And I think that made me think on that. So in some ways there was always music in our home, and in some ways too, it's very. I think obviously, it's funny. You could always pinpoint what inspires you. You know the exact what inspires. But as far as influence, we get influenced by everything. We get influenced by the great literature that's on the shelves here in the library, to the great music we hear, as well as to the latest silly insurance commercial you just saw on TV a second ago. It all influences you. So, but inspiration, I think also probably more than because I'm born and raised here, and I think just the impact of the Chinese American experience influenced me much more too. And I realized. You learn that with my parents. When I was young, I used to think, well, how come they don't go to any PTA meetings? How come they don't socialize with anyone else in the neighborhood? And I realized I thought it was a cultural thing, but a lot of it was a legal thing. Like they came of age, they had to first elude the Chinese Exclusion Act. That was the first, and God help us, last American law that made it legal for one race of people to become citizens here. And then after that, there was McCarthyism. So they were socialized to live this under the radar existence. They didn't want to be noticed or seen. So I think that definitely influenced the writing of Black Thing. And at one point, it's always, in some ways, we're always concealing and revealing with that. So that's how it came about. And Saki, yes.
I just want to ask you, how do you feel about the Cantonese opera, which is so prevalent back in those days? I mean, you're quite positive in Canton, which I appreciate. So, do you find that, how do you feel about now, and how do you affect the musical writing?
Oh, thank you for asking that. Yes, yeah, we get into that. In fact, the whole second part of the book is it's called Our Laundry, Our Town. The Our Town part came about, it brought many worlds together. So it said like a lot of immigrants are just, everyone feels like they're other or outsider in some way or another, especially in such a diverse city like New York. I think we're all searching to find our communities and everything too. And so we're always looking for American frames of reference to contextualize everything. And a lot of that was, going into the theater, what would really help bring a lot of worlds together was when I learned that Our Town, the great Thornton Wilder's, amazing groundbreaking play, Our Town, actually has a lot of Chinese influence, because Thornton Wilder's father was consul general to Hong Kong and Shanghai. So he spent part of his childhood in China. And there's a great collection of letters between Gertrude Stein and Thornton Wilder. They're coming. And I love that Gertrude Stein calls him Thorny as only she can. Dear Thorny. But then he writes back saying, I'm writing this play that steals all the ideas from your Gertrude Stein's Making of Americans, along with the concept of the property manager from Peking opera or Cantonese opera. And I was like, oh my God, so that was the origination of what became the stage manager in Our Town. And just to really help him, like, it's a film always like in Our Town, saying, wait a minute, one of the most, if not the most Americana play ever, Our Town, actually has a lot of Chinese influence. That really made me feel like, okay, we are part of this even more than we know. Like, again, not everyone needs this, but that really helped us. And so that appreciation of the influence of Cantonese opera and Peking opera on what was so much of 20th century experimental theater really brought a lot of it home. So I had a much more great appreciation for Cantonese opera, Peking theater. And then just so much of it, I think that influenced a lot of my writing. Like, yes, the Gong Hei Kid has a lot of spheres. A lot of my characters, it has like otherworldly characters, maybe even spheres. And so much of Cantonese opera and Peking opera, the characters are spheres too, rather than living human beings. So that has a tremendous influence. That's why it came about. And just, I think my wife Wendy is here too, and but also how this really helped bring this all home too. In the book, we talk about how we did a workshop, a Fulbright workshop in Hong Kong, where we taught playwriting and performance to Hong Kong students, and they read Our Town, and then they wrote their own plays in response. And while I was there as part of this residency, I was invited to perform The Last Emperor of Flushing in China. So that's when I felt that these stories, maybe there's enough gravitas enough for it to be a book. And again, coming from the rock and roll world, I felt like after years of touring, we're doing these performances, I said, okay, maybe it's time to make an album version, more permanent record of this. That's how that came about. But thank you. Oh, we have one question online from Alice. Hello, Alice. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for the question. How did your father know how to speak English well? Was he born in the U.S. or came at an early age? The latter, yes, he came at an early age, and I guess it was really survival for him because he had a tough life too. We talked about how the impact of his father. He was an opium addict, and he died of an opium overdose down in Chinatown. So he was orphaned too. So he had to really learn to speak English quickly, really learn to fend for himself. So it came about that way. And this is funny. This is published by Fordham University Press. I'm very grateful to the Fordham University Press. But my father had some problems with the Jesuits. But I'm so glad they still published the book. I was like, okay, I was sure that chapter was going to be the deal breaker, but it was not. But it was that, yes. Yes.
I just want to say that I was growing up a kid in Brooklyn. In the early 60s, there was a Chinese laundry called the corner, a very nice family, Mr. Eng, Energy.
Oh, yeah.
And somehow, he, at some point, he and his family was giving my family, first my mother, I guess, a big box of almond cookies from Chinatown, like that. And she was anticipated by giving a big box of chocolate.
Oh.
What else was I going to say? Also, one time as a kid, in a hard time, I had to draw a picture of a building in the neighborhood that I loved. And I just drew a wonderful black and white water brush of the front of the Chinese laundry. I just liked it because it was like the only store that had plants, and at that time it had plants in the windows. As you probably know, much more for the media, it's a big belief to have leaves plants or something in the windows or something like that.
Right.
I might still have the most around that in the world. But although the speaker my mom told me she thought that Mr. Eng, who was so smart, helped with his doctor, I swear, he was very gentle, kind, and helped with him. His wife also was no English. So he was, the kids all very Americanized. They have 5 kids, I think, and one of them I maybe might have gotten vanished eventually because he married my brother. Like that. But I think we know that was one. She said she thought she told me recently about she said in memory, she's 94. She says the memory is not so great anymore. And she thinks maybe in his case the name NG wasn't the original last name.
No, I think what it was is they were all what they call romanizations of a Chinese sound. So that's why you got ING, NG, ANG, ENG. So I think it's all, yeah, just everyone was just struggling with, to Romanize or Anglicize the Chinese names. It's,
something, but I think that was your generations earlier.
No, my parents both arrived as paper, and the paper son policy is again during the Chinese Exclusion Act. Many Chinese immigrants would immigrate. They would essentially have a fake document. They would purchase documents, false identification papers, so they could enter. That's what I love. Yes, exactly. That's what I love about New York City, the mix of cultures, and that's what I feel what makes us too. So there was that. Oh, thank you. No, when we talk about too, where I grew up in a very Jewish neighborhood in Flushing too, and I was every Saturday in the 8th grade I was dancing the horror at a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. So it was a very Jewish neighborhood, and even.
And she married my Jewish father. So in a way, she's like an inside, something or other.
Oh yeah. No, in the late 20th century, that immigration and assimilation struggles were real. Like it's in here too. Like the first to marry non-Chinese in my family was my sister. That caused a kerfuffle, of course. That really did. Yes. Okay, we have a question here from online. Did you and your brother Herman had chores and had to help your parents? Oh yes, we all worked in laundry. Absolutely, Did you and your brother have chores and had to help out in your parents' laundry? Yes, we all had to work in laundry. That was our thing. But we had it easier. By the time we came around, there was a secret, actually, and it was still called the Chinese hand laundry. By the time I came around, like in the 60s and 70s, nothing was washed by hand anymore. It was all sent out, and we just wrapped everything up. And if you wanted to wash by hand, it cost you extra. So that was I guess in that way too, we've become very American. We were part of the middleman system by then too. So we were very much American by then too. Yes, yes, hi. Yes, you know, you really, I really saw how hard my parents worked. They worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. And some ways too, it almost gave us like sometimes we feel guilty. I mean, we're grateful that they made it a lot easier for us, but sometimes you feel guilty, like, oh my God, they worked so hard. And what they had to do, and that was their world. And then as you hear, like in the arranged marriage, it was not a happy arranged marriage. So you saw that dichotomy where they couldn't have been more committed to the family. They lived for the family and for this, and yet they did not have a lot of warmth between each other, or at least not when I was a kid. Like, as you know, I'm the youngest of 5, and sure, with your siblings, it's older friends. You know, we all go through the same things, have different experiences. In interviewing some of my brothers and some of my cousins, they knew different parents than I did. Like one of my cousins, he told me that, oh yeah, they grew up in Chinatown. So for them, going out to Flushing was like going to the country. They said, oh my God, I learned to ride a bicycle in Queens and everything. It was like a different world. And they told me, your father was the life of the party. He would play Frank Sinatra records and dress like him. Like, I never met that guy. So it's amazing. So I think also it's a very different thing by the time I came around. That's why I think I was able to go into the arts easier. For better and for worse, I had a lot of freedom. They were very tired. They'd been through so much. They were very tired. I could see that now. Like so I think though that value system just the total commitment that they had, and just seeing what they did, and always made me have a lifelong love and respect for always mom and pop independent businesses. So that I always had that, and of course, so just to see what immigrant families go through in every way. Yes.
How old were they when they had the arranged marriage? And am I hearing this? I'm probably not hearing right. The Chinese Inclusion Act or exclusion? Exclusion. Yeah, can you tell me a little more?
Sure.
But how old were they when that marriage?
My mother was 14, and my dad was 16. They couldn't even go for a drink on their wedding night, you know. But maybe they had one anyway. But it was the Chinese Exclusion Act. It was in the 1880s. It made it illegal for Chinese citizens Chinese people to become citizens here, or to marry other citizens, and for most of us to bring their wives over too. You know, it's in the book where I talk about how it got so bad that at the height of it, the ratio was 20 men to 1 woman in Chinatowns. So people used to call it the Chinese Extinction Act, not the Chinese Exclusion Act. And it came out of all the like as always, you know. Sadly, we were always in the cycle in this country where they were worried about the immigrants taking people's jobs. Does that sound familiar? And so first out west, they made it so. First, you know, the Chinese built the railroads, and they weren't allowed to be there for the completion picture. But the late great photographer historian Corky Lee recreated that moment where the Chinese, he had descendants of the Chinese workers there for that great railroad photo. And then after being, I guess, pun intended, railroaded out of that, once the gold rush started in San Francisco, they started making the licenses to pan for gold so much more expensive for Chinese and for others. And those things kept escalating and escalating. That's why direct action always works. But I talk about the Chinese Hand Laundry Alliance, and that really, they paved the way for people like my parents. They stood up against these racist laws in New York City. They finally stood up and essentially unionized, and that really stood tall for them too. And I'm so glad that the Chinese Hand Laundry Alliance is getting there too, and they're even featured right now at the Museum of the City of New York. Has a great exhibition on activism in New York City, and I'm so glad they gave one gallery to the Chinese Hand Laundry Alliance. So there's a large history of, you know, there's always like racist notions, but then when these racist notions become laws, that's a very different thing. And so that's what the brain gets. Thank you. Yes. Oh yes, there's a footnote. Yes. Although I was in the months, I like that May to this. Okay. Questions. Yes.
I have a question about craft. Because I'm a teacher of memoir, and
she'll be reading here in a few weeks too.
I will. So I teach still on memoir students who are coming to memoir for the first time, and it's not as simple as it appears to figure out how to tell your own story, and you work in
entirely different genres. Usually, I'm just curious about the process of telling your own story, whether that required a kind of creation of a persona, whether the stories can resonate, or I find generally one is so close to one's own experience that to narrow it down to one story is hard. I'm just curious about the writing.
Oh, yeah, no, it took a long time, but I guess when I first started doing, I did create a persona, but when I first started doing self-referential work, it was more on the stage first. Like I'm a playwright and a performer, and I call myself now an acoustic punk raconteur. That's my main thing now, you know. And so yes, I did create that character of the last emperor of Flushing, just to really create a way into a lot of these stories. But it comes about where it's you know, everyone's different how they approach their craft and how they approach telling their own stories. But at the end of the day, everyone wants to tell their story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. But I think also it's all about, rather than just saying, you never want. I guess to me, like the least pleasing and satisfying memoir is I did this, I did that. And hopefully, it's always just like any writing, it has to have its own theme, its own topic, its own arc, and you find. What is it about? It's not just about us. It's about you. Hopefully, you find a way to make your story. You attach your story to the larger narrative of your times and your era. So I look at that, and now and this is a very different thing for me because I've written more plays than prose. This is very different for me. But also, I guess the way the in between is I do a lot of monologue work. So monologues sort of I feel are in between. Like that's really in between. Playwriting and prose writing. So in many ways you approach it the same way. You look at a different task, and I think so because I was telling my own stories on stage. In some ways, because I told my own stories on stage, that's such a raw connection. In some ways, having the distance of writing in prose is actually in some ways a little bit easier. In some ways too, because literally like facing an audience is a very different thing. So that's how it came about. But then after it's always still the same questions you're always asking yourself as a writer. Why are we telling the story now? Who do you feel it reads? And what do you hope is the takeaway message? So you always think about that. Yeah, thank you. Great. Any last questions online too? Okay, thank you for raising so much. Okay, so we get to speak informally now. And there's so many interesting people here. I hope we get to talk to each other too as well. I want to thank Emil and everyone here at Hudson Park Library for having us. Thank you so much. And the artist Lainey Lee is here. Without her show here and the introduction a few months ago, this would not have happened. So thank you, Lainey. Thank you. And thank you everyone who's joined us in person and joined us online. Please support your public libraries and both your independent bookstores and all your independent bookstores. So thank you very much, everyone, again. Thank you. Thank you, online. Thank you so much.